Clara Dawson arrived at the edge of the frontier town with a weary heart and a body that felt as if it could crack under the weight of every mile she had endured on the open plains. The sun hung low above the horizon, pouring a dull gold haze over the battered main street where a few townsfolk moved with the slow rhythm of a place long accustomed to hardship. Clara guided her trembling horse toward a modest cabin with a wooden sign that read Dr. Hartley, though even this simple lettering wavered before her tired eyes. She slid from the saddle and steadied herself, fighting the weakness that tugged at her legs as she approached the door of the small clinic. Inside, the air felt warm and still, scented with dried herbs and the faint smoke of an earlier fire. The space was tidy and humble, with shelves of neatly arranged bottles and a narrow cot covered with a clean woven blanket. Clara hesitated at the threshold, unsure if she had the strength to speak or even ask for help. Her ribs pulsed with each breath, and every step she had taken since dawn had carved the pain deeper into her side. The long journey had not only strained her body but had pressed fear into her spirit, for she had fled men who believed they owned everything they touched, including her freedom. She stood there gathering a fragment of courage when the doctor finally turned toward her. James Hartley looked nothing like the gruff wilderness healer she had imagined. His eyes carried a quiet steadiness and his posture held no hint of judgment. He paused only long enough to recognize her pain before stepping closer with a soft calm that seemed to settle the air around them. Clara felt her throat tighten, for in all her recent trials she had not encountered a single soul who greeted her with such patient sincerity. James invited her inside and guided her toward the cot with a gentle gesture. Clara lowered herself onto the edge of the blanket, moving slowly to keep the pain from flaring too sharply. She had grown accustomed to guarding herself from the gaze of rough men, and even now, in the relative safety of the clinic, she held her shawl tightly around her body. The doctor could see that she was hurt, but he waited for her to speak first, giving her space to decide how much to reveal. Clara felt a mix of shame, fear and exhaustion swirling within her, and she struggled to find the right words to explain her injuries or the story behind them. Her voice came out as a whisper, thin and fragile, as she asked where she should undress for him to see her wounds. The question carried more than the surface meaning, for it reflected her fear of vulnerability and her dread of being regarded with anything less than respect. She had learned from bitter experience that many men in the territory saw weakness as an invitation to ownership. She prepared herself for discomfort, bracing for the possibility of a harsh or dismissive response. Yet the doctor simply met her gaze with steady kindness and told her she did not need to expose more than was necessary. He said she could lift her blouse only enough for him to examine the injured side, and that her comfort mattered as much as her healing. The words settled over her like a soft blanket, soothing a part of her she had not known was still capable of trust. In that quiet moment, Clara felt something shift, not only in the room but within herself. After weeks of running and hiding, she finally sensed that she had stepped into a place where dignity still held meaning, and where her fear no longer ruled every breath she took. James Hartley moved with a quiet assurance that eased the tension in the small clinic, as if every gesture he made pushed back the shadows clinging to Clara Dawson. She sat on the narrow cot, clutching the edge of the woven blanket, while her breath fluttered in shallow waves across her aching ribs. The room around her seemed to hush itself, waiting for the next step, yet nothing in the doctor's manner suggested hurry or discomfort. He simply prepared a small basin of warm water and gathered a strip of soft cloth, all the while keeping her in sight without crowding her with his presence. Clara watched him with cautious eyes, wondering how a man could be so still-hearted in a world that often rewarded cruelty more than gentleness. Her question, "Where should I undress?" still hovered between them, yet the shame she feared never surfaced in his expression. Instead, he paused beside the cot and lowered the basin onto a wooden stool before kneeling slightly so his gaze aligned with hers. He told her again that she could remain covered as she wished and reveal only enough for him to treat the injured side. His voice carried a tone that felt almost like a shelter above her battered nerves, and the warmth within it struck her in a place far deeper than her wound. She had spent months surrounded by threats, by rough hands, by the constant possibility of violation, and now this simple assurance felt like a lifeline tossed across a river that had nearly drowned her. Clara drew a slow breath, steadying her trembling fingers as she slipped one side of her blouse upward just far enough to reveal the bruise spreading like a shadow beneath her ribs. The pain flared as the fabric moved, but she bit back any sound, determined not to appear weak. James saw the way she stiffened and nodded with calm understanding before dipping the cloth into the warm water. He wrung it out with patient movements, then placed it gently against her skin. The heat seeped into the tender flesh, and Clara felt her shoulders sag ever so slightly as the tight coil within her began to loosen. James worked with the quiet focus of someone who had seen far more suffering than he ever spoke about. His hands were steady, his touch careful, never lingering longer than necessary. Clara studied the lines of concentration around his eyes and the soft furrow of concern that appeared whenever she winced. He asked no probing questions, no personal demands, no attempt to pry into the story she was not ready to tell. He simply tended to her wound as though her comfort were a matter of unquestionable importance. As he examined the bruising, he noted the shape and depth of the injury, and Clara caught a flicker of something in his expression, something like anger, but not directed at her, rather at the harm someone else had inflicted. It faded quickly, replaced by the same calm resolve that marked every movement he made. For Clara, that moment spoke volumes. It told her he recognized the violence behind the injury, and yet he respected her silence. It told her he saw her suffering without treating her as helpless. It told her she was safe, at least for this fleeting time, within these wooden walls. She felt an unexpected warmth rise in her chest, a fragile sense of security that she had long thought lost. The doctor cleaned the bruise, applied a soothing salve, and wrapped her side with fresh linen, all without a single hint of impatience. He offered her water and encouraged her to rest a little longer before attempting to stand. Clara felt the weight of her fears ease like a storm drifting beyond the ridge. His gentle answer to her hesitant question had done more than reassure her. It had restored a small piece of faith she had almost surrendered forever. Clara rested against the wooden wall, feeling the steady throb beneath the bandage, while the fading light of late afternoon filtered through the clinic window. The warmth of the treatment soothed her, but it was the doctor's quiet presence that allowed her breath to settle into something close to calm. James Hartley had stepped away only long enough to clean his hands and gather a small tin of herbal tea leaves, yet even as he moved she felt the echo of his steady kindness lingering in the room like a protective veil. When he returned, he poured hot water from a kettle into a simple clay cup and set it beside her, inviting her to drink if she felt strong enough. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting the rising steam melt the chill of fear that still clung to her ribs. For a moment neither of them spoke, and the silence stretched in a way that felt almost gentle rather than heavy. Clara kept her gaze on the steam drifting upward in thin silver ribbons while her mind wrestled with the weight of everything she carried. She had not planned to reveal anything of her past, yet she felt the unspoken understanding hanging in the air. James did not push, but she sensed he already knew her wounds came from more than a fall or an accident. Eventually he knelt beside her again and checked the linen wrap with the same respect as before, then sat on the edge of a wooden chest across from her, leaving space for her to choose whether to speak. Clara felt the question rise inside her like a tide building against her ribs. She had been holding her story tight for so long that the words felt sharp as they pressed toward her throat. She took a slow breath and told him she needed to say something, if only so he would understand the danger around her. James remained still, his gaze fixed on her with unwavering patience, inviting her to continue without a single spoken prompt. So she began with halting steps, describing the ranch she had fled and the man who controlled it with iron fists and cold demands. She told him how the Baron had claimed her debts as reason to keep her bound to his household, and how his men had watched her every move until the night she finally broke free. As she spoke, the room seemed to darken with the weight of her memories, yet James did not flinch. The anger she had glimpsed earlier flickered again in his eyes, but it remained carefully tempered by something deeper, a kind of protective resolve that did not need to be voiced. Clara told him of the nights she hid in abandoned barns, of the days she rode hard with little water, of the constant dread that the Baron's riders would catch up to her and drag her back. She told him her bruised ribs came from an attack during her last escape when one of the riders caught her, but she managed to slip free before he could do worse. Her voice trembled as she spoke, yet she found herself able to continue because the doctor met each word with quiet strength rather than pity. When she finished, she felt hollowed out, as though the telling had scraped away the last of her defenses. James rose slowly and placed another log on the fire, letting the fresh flame cast a warm glow across the room. He then returned to her side and assured her that she was no longer alone and that the town would not turn its back on someone seeking refuge. His tone carried a confidence she had not felt in years, and for the first time she believed escape might truly lead to safety rather than another trap. Clara looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and relief. The man who had merely answered her hesitant question with kindness was now offering something far greater, a promise of protection and a chance to reclaim control over her life. The fear inside her loosened its grip, and in its place rose a fragile but growing hope that her journey might finally be turning toward light rather than darkness. Clara woke the next morning to the gentle crackle of the clinic fire and the soft glow of dawn filtering through the thin curtains. The ache in her ribs lingered, yet felt far less sharp than the night before, and for the first time in many months she sensed the faint stir of something that resembled peace. The town outside remained quiet except for the distant sound of hoofsteps and the low murmur of early risers preparing for another long day on the frontier. She pushed herself upright slowly, grateful for the clean bandages wrapped around her side and for the rare feeling of safety that clung to the small wooden room like a warm quilt. James Hartley stepped inside carrying a small tin of salve and a fresh bandage. His steady presence filled the room with the same calm assurance she had grown to trust in such a short time. He greeted her with a gentle nod and asked if she had rested well, his voice carrying that soft strength that never demanded more than she could give. Clara returned the nod, feeling an unexpected warmth in her chest as she realized how deeply she appreciated his quiet care. She allowed him to tend her ribs again, and though the pain flared briefly, she no longer felt the same instinctive fear that once tightened every muscle in her body. As he worked, he explained that he had spoken with a few trusted townsfolk who would be willing to offer help if danger followed her into their settlement. Clara listened with wide eyes, surprised that strangers might stand with her despite knowing nothing of her except the hardship she had endured. James told her that this town, though small, had weathered countless storms, and its people believed in protecting those who sought refuge within its borders. The idea settled into her heart with a weight both unfamiliar and comforting. She had wandered for so long believing the world held no corner where she might truly belong, and yet here she was being offered shelter not as a debt or obligation but as a simple act of human decency. A soft gust of wind brushed against the window and the faint scent of morning dew drifted into the clinic. Clara realized how deeply she longed for a chance at a new beginning, a chance to live beyond the shadow of the ranch baron who had once controlled every moment of her life. When James finished binding her side, he sat near her and told her she could stay in town for as long as she needed. His tone carried no pressure, no expectation, only a straightforward honesty that allowed her to breathe freely. Clara felt something shift within her, a steady rising of hope that pushed back the darkness she had carried for so long. She thought of the long nights she had spent hiding in abandoned stables, the fear of waking to rough hands or angry voices, the relentless pressure of knowing she had no one to turn to. All of it seemed to loosen its grip as she sat in that humble clinic with the morning sun warming her face. The answer James had given her the day before had seemed simple then, yet she now understood it had changed more than the moment. It had changed the direction of her life. She rose slowly from the cot, testing her strength, and found she could stand without trembling. James offered his arm, but she shook her head with a small grateful smile, wanting to take this step on her own. She moved toward the door, and when she pushed it open, the entire town lay before her, bathed in early light. The wooden storefronts, the dusty road, the soft voices drifting through the cool air, all seemed to welcome her into a world she had once believed forever closed to her. Behind her, James remained at the doorway, watching with the same quiet steadiness he had shown since the moment she arrived. Clara felt his presence like a guardian flame at her back, and she knew she no longer walked alone. She stepped forward, and the future stepped with her, carrying the promise of freedom, healing, and a life rebuilt from the ashes of fear. His gentle reply to her timid question had opened a path she never imagined, and now, with the town rising to meet her, she began her new beginning, one careful, hopeful breath at a time.